Am I the a-hole for keeping the $2 million inheritance meant for me? Let's start back about 2 months ago. I, 30M, have had the weirdest, most surreal couple of months of my entire life, and I am still trying to wrap my head around everything that has happened. My mom's, 61F, old friend Gary, 60-ish M, recently passed away, and to my absolute surprise, he left almost all of his property and entire estate in my name in his will. For context, I am married to Hannah, 28F, and we have a 2-year-old toddler. We are not wealthy by any means, but both Hannah and I have good jobs, we work hard every day, and we are constantly working towards building a good, stable life for us and our kid. We watch our budget, we save where we can, and like most young families, we deal with the daily stress of mortgage payments, daycare expenses, and planning for the future. About 2 months ago, I was checking the mail after getting home from work, and among the usual stack of bills and flyers, there was a formal envelope addressed to me. An estate attorney had sent a letter to our house stating that Gary had passed away and that I was specifically named in his will. This came as a total shock as we had not seen Gary or his family for years. The only memory I have of Gary was from when I was a little kid. His son Jason, late 20s M, and I were friends back then, and our families used to be pretty close. Gary and my mom were college friends who stayed in touch, and they would frequently come to our house for weekend dinners or casual dinner parties. Jason and I were of a similar age, and I vividly remember Jason following me around the house, us sharing snacks, and playing video games in my room for hours while the grown-ups had fun downstairs. When I was around 10 years old, they moved out of our town, and I never saw or heard from them again. This is literally the first time in years that I have even thought about Gary or Jason. I initially thought the letter was some kind of elaborate scam letter designed to steal my personal information. I stood in my kitchen holding the piece of paper, staring at the legal lettering, completely convinced it was fake. But after reading Gary's full name on the letter and recognizing it, I decided to call my mom to ask if he was the same Gary who used to be her friend from college. I dialed her number, and when she answered, I read the name off the letter to her. She confirmed that the name was indeed the exact same. My heart did a weird flutter in my chest. I hung up with her and decided to take the legal notice seriously. I replied to the law firm and scheduled an official Zoom call with the estate attorney. When the day of the call arrived, Hannah and I sat together in front of my laptop in our home office, both of us nervously tapping our fingers on the desk. The estate attorney, who explained that he was also the executor of the will, came onto the screen. He got straight to the point and told us that Gary had officially named me in his will. He explained the scope of the assets. Gary had left me his primary house, which is valued close to $1.5 million, along with around $800,000 in other liquid assets, investments, and personal property. My jaw practically hit the desk. I sat there in total disbelief, staring blankly at the webcam screen while Hannah gasped beside me. This was a massive shock as I have absolutely no relation to him, no ongoing connection, and there was zero reason why he would even remember me after 2 decades, let alone leave me an entire fortune. Before wrapping up the meeting, the executor mentioned that Jason had been trying to figure out what was going on as well, and that Jason wanted to get in touch with me. The attorney asked if I would be comfortable providing my contact information to him. I of course agreed, as I was desperate to talk to anyone who could help me understand what on earth was going on. A few days later, a video meeting was set up. I sat at my laptop again, and when the video connected, I talked to Jason via Zoom call. Jason and his wife joined the call from their home. Looking at his face on the screen was trippy. I could still faintly see the features of the little boy who used to follow me around my childhood bedroom playing video games, but he looked exhausted and deeply stressed. I asked him about Gary, expressing my sincere condolences for his loss, and tried to ask what was going on with the estate. Jason took a deep breath and began explaining the family history that I had never known about as a kid. He told me that Gary and his mom had actually gotten divorced right around the time they moved out of our town all those years ago. His mother had won primary custody of him after the separation, and initially, he used to spend weekends at Gary's place. However, after a year or so, Gary started slowly pulling out of his life completely. The weekend visits stopped, and Gary met him maybe a few times every year at most. As time went on, Gary moved away to a completely different town, and they fell into having very limited contact, reduced to generic holiday greetings and a few brief phone calls every year. Jason explained that Gary lived entirely alone for the rest of his life and did not marry again. Jason is his only living next of kin, as Jason's mom has already passed away a few years ago. Jason told me that he had also only come to know about Gary's death via the estate attorney's formal letter in the mail. When the estate attorney first contacted him, the attorney told Jason that Gary had left a sum of $100,000 for Jason in his inheritance. Naturally, Jason had asked the executor what Gary had done with the rest of his massive estate, and that was when the attorney revealed that I was named as the primary beneficiary for everything else. On the Zoom call, Jason looked directly into the camera and asked me if I had been in touch with Gary over the last few years behind his back. I looked him in the eyes and told him honestly, no, absolutely not. Jason then asked me if there was any possible reason why I would be listed as the sole main beneficiary, and I told him truthfully that I was not aware of any reason whatsoever. The call ended on a quiet, incredibly awkward note. After I hung up the Zoom call, my head was spinning uncontrollably. Wild thoughts were racing through my mind. I couldn't stop thinking that maybe I was secretly related to Gary in some way, like maybe he was secretly my biological dad, or perhaps a sperm donor, or that my mom had an affair with him back in college or while my dad was working. The whole situation felt like something straight out of a movie. I called my mom immediately and drove over to her house to talk to her face-to-face about it. I sat across from her at her kitchen table and laid everything out. I directly asked her if there was any chance I was related to Gary. My mom looked me straight in the eyes and adamantly told me that I am in no way related to Gary. I pressed her harder, asking why on earth a man I haven't seen since I was 10 years old would leave me nearly $2 million in an inheritance, and my mom said she genuinely could not think of a single reason why he would do that. She swore to me that she had never dated Gary, that they were strictly just very good friends from their college days, and that nothing physical ever happened between them. She insisted over and over again that my dad was my real biological dad. Unfortunately, my dad passed away 3 years ago, hence I cannot do a simple father-son paternity test with him to put my mind at ease. In the weeks following those conversations, the reality of the situation has been sitting heavily on our shoulders. The money involved is completely life-changing for me, Hannah, and our child. It would instantly pay off all our debts, secure our child's college fund, pay off a house, and give my family a massive head start on so many things we want to do in life. However, the ethics of the situation are tearing everything apart. I know for a fact that Jason plans to challenge the will in court, as it makes no sense to him why his father's entire life savings and property should go to me, a distant childhood memory, and not his actual biological son. My mom is also strongly against me keeping it. She feels that I shouldn't accept the inheritance at all because we had nothing to do with Gary for the last 20 years, and she is convinced it has to be some sort of bizarre legal mistake or error as to why he left me the money. Hannah and I, however, have talked about this for hours late into the night, and we want to claim it as we are the legally named, real beneficiaries. We want to secure our family's future. To make sure there wasn't a clerical error, Hannah and I got in touch with the estate attorney again to ask for absolute clarification. The attorney reviewed the legal documents with us and stated firmly that the will has not changed for several years. He even mentioned that he himself was physically present as one of the official witnesses when Gary added my name to the document years ago. He assured us it was definitely not a mistake or a typo on the paperwork, but he also admitted that he does not know why Gary chose to name me over his own family. Am I the asshole to claim close to $2 million in estate from Gary, when I hardly knew him? More importantly, is there a way to check if he was my real dad, as he has passed away and my dad is also not around anymore? I am not able to understand why he would give me all the money. Update. I had been debating whether to post this update for the last week because I honestly wasn't sure how much I wanted to share. A lot of people in the comments gave me advice that helped me think through what was happening, especially when it came to the possibility of a paternity test. At the time, I thought that was the most logical explanation for why Gary would leave such a huge amount of money to me after barely being part of my life for nearly 2 decades. I want to explain what actually happened because the truth is much worse than anything I had imagined. I don't mean to trigger anyone with what I'm about to describe, but I think it's important to explain why I made the decision I did. Most of the comments focused on getting a paternity test. My mind immediately went in the same direction when I first found out about the inheritance. Gary had known my mom since college, he had known me when I was a child, and then he disappeared from our lives. Suddenly, after his death, I was apparently the person he wanted to receive almost everything he owned. I asked my mom about the possibility that Gary could somehow be my biological father. She became extremely upset and told me that I should not pursue anything like that. She said it was insulting that I could even suggest she had done something behind my dad's back. I understood why she was angry, but I still couldn't get past the inheritance. I asked her more than once if she could think of any reason Gary would leave millions of dollars to someone he hadn't spoken to in almost 20 years. She wouldn't answer me. She just kept saying there was no reason for me to investigate it. That made things even harder because from my perspective, there had to be a reason. I wasn't going to ask Jason for a sibling DNA test. He had already told me he planned to challenge the will, and I understood why he would be upset. Gary was his father, and he was only getting $100,000 while I was apparently receiving the rest of the estate. Jason didn't owe me a DNA test, and I didn't want to make an already terrible situation worse. Since my dad died 3 years ago, I also couldn't simply test him. Some commenters suggested testing someone from my dad's side of the family instead. My dad's older brother had also passed away, but his son, my cousin, was still alive. I decided I would ask my cousin if he was willing to take a DNA test with me. That way, I could at least establish whether I was biologically related to my dad's side of the family. I didn't see it as accusing my mom anymore. At that point, I just wanted an explanation. Then my mom came over to our house one weekend. I told her about my plan to ask my cousin about the DNA test. She became extremely angry. She asked me why I would tell our family that I had doubts about whether my dad was my real father. I told her that I needed to know what was going on. I explained that the money wasn't the only issue anymore. It was the fact that there was no obvious reason for Gary to have chosen me. I couldn't understand how someone who hadn't been part of my life since I was a child could suddenly decide that I should receive millions of dollars. We got into a huge argument. My wife tried to calm us down, but eventually my mom completely broke down. She started sobbing uncontrollably, and at that point my wife signaled for me to stop and leave the house. I went for a walk because I realized the argument wasn't going anywhere. When I came back, my mom was sitting on the couch and looked completely devastated. My wife told me to sit down with them. That's when my mom finally told me the truth. Gary and my mom had known each other for most of their lives. They grew up in the same town and attended the same high school and college. They were best friends, but according to my mom, there was never a romantic relationship between them. After my mom married my dad, Gary and his wife eventually moved to the same town. The families reconnected, and Gary and my dad became friends as well. Since Jason and I were close in age, the families spent a lot of time together. That explains many of my childhood memories. Jason was always around during birthdays and family parties. We played video games together, hung out at my house, and were basically just two kids whose parents happened to be friends. I had no reason to think there was anything unusual about that friendship. Then, when I was around 9 years old, everything changed. Gary came to our house one day to pick something up. My dad wasn't home at the time. According to my mom, Gary made a pass at her. She rejected him, and they got into an argument. The situation escalated, and Gary became physical with her. He attempted to sexually assault her. My mom managed to fight him off. She kicked him and got away from him before locking herself in another room. When she eventually told my dad what had happened, my dad went after Gary and beat him up. Gary never filed assault charges against my dad because he knew my mom could have reported what he had done to her. My mom also chose not to file charges. After that day, she never saw Gary again. A few months later, my parents learned that Gary and his family had moved to another town. I believe that was around the same period when Gary and his wife divorced. As far as I knew, Gary had simply disappeared. My mom never told me what happened. My dad never told me either. They had apparently decided together that I was too young to know and that I didn't need to carry something like that with me throughout my childhood. Over the years, Gary became nothing more than a distant memory. I hadn't spoken to him. I hadn't seen him. I wasn't even thinking about him. Then his estate attorney showed up in my life decades later and told me that Gary had died and left me his house and hundreds of thousands of dollars in other assets. My mom said she was horrified when she learned what was in the will. She had apparently considered telling me not to accept the money, but she didn't know how to explain the situation without telling me something she and my dad had deliberately kept from me for more than 20 years. Suddenly, the inheritance made sense. Gary wasn't secretly my biological father. There wasn't some hidden relationship between him and my mom. There wasn't some family connection that I had somehow missed. He had done something horrible to my mother when I was a child, and years later, he apparently decided that leaving his estate to me was some way of dealing with what he had done. That realization hit me much harder than the inheritance itself. Looking back, I feel like I was the biggest asshole to my mom during this entire situation. I was so focused on finding an explanation for the money that I started questioning her integrity. I asked her about paternity tests. I involved my cousin. I considered the possibility that my dad wasn't my biological father. I kept pushing her for answers even though she clearly wasn't ready to tell me what happened. I can't imagine what it must have felt like for her to hear her own son question whether she had been unfaithful to his father, especially when the actual reason Gary left me the money had nothing to do with that. My mom had been carrying this horrible memory for decades. She wasn't hiding some secret affair from me. She was hiding something that had been done to her. That distinction matters a lot to me now. I also don't want Gary to get the satisfaction of thinking that his money somehow made things right. If leaving me his estate was his attempt at forgiving himself, I don't want any part of that. I don't want his house. I don't want his investments. I don't want his money. I don't want anything that belonged to him. I decided to disclaim the inheritance. I know a lot of people are going to say that $2.5 million is life-changing money, and they're absolutely right. It would make a huge difference for my wife, our child, and me. But my parents are financially comfortable, and my mom is my only living parent. I'm also their only son. My wife and I both have good jobs, and we're already able to provide a comfortable life for our child. This wasn't a decision I made because the money wouldn't matter. It would matter. I'm giving it up because I don't want Gary's final act toward me to be something I accept as compensation for what he did to my mom. My wife and I discussed it together, and we both agreed that disclaiming the inheritance was the right choice for us. I also don't feel like I owe Gary anything. If he genuinely believed I was his son, or if there had been some other relationship between us that he wanted me to know about, he could have explained it in his will or left some kind of letter. Instead, he left my mom with the burden of explaining the truth after his death. And I don't want her carrying any more of that because of me. I'm also not going to pursue the paternity test anymore. I don't need to investigate whether Gary was somehow my biological father, and I don't need to question whether my dad was my biological father either. My dad was my dad. He raised me, loved me, and was the person I knew as my father. I don't need a DNA result to change that relationship. I also understand Jason's anger much better now. From his perspective, his father left almost everything to someone he hadn't seen since childhood. I can understand why that would be devastating and confusing. I don't know what Jason will ultimately do about the will, and at this point, I don't really care whether he challenges it successfully. I'm not interested in fighting him over Gary's money. I have already decided to disclaim the inheritance. I will not be taking the paternity test, I won't be investigating my family history any further, and I don't want to know anything else about Gary beyond what I already know. Whatever Gary intended when he put my name in that will, I don't want his money to become part of my family's life. My wife and I made the decision together, and I feel much more certain about it now that I know the truth. I don't want a single penny from that fucker, and I hope he rots in hell.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.